Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Easy Mini Painting with me, Christopher Ridge. And I thought that to honor the upcoming Godzilla vs. Kong, we could knock out some Godzilla-themed miniatures here. So I bought the Godzilla Tokyo Clash board game, which I have not actually played, but is apparently an okay game. And I figured that we can go ahead and paint the miniatures that came with that, because I think that they're pretty straightforward and they should be fun to paint. Godzilla himself is who we're going to start with, and the reason for that is because he should be very simple to paint compared to the rest of the miniatures. The reason for that is because he's actually already got the sort of brown and green skin tone that you see here. So we're just going to be worrying about the spines and the facial details and the claws and all of that good stuff, and it should be pretty straightforward for anyone who is an experienced painter or even a novice beginner painter. This should be a very, very simple, straightforward paint job. So why don't we get started here? Now the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to knock out the claws and talons that he has. So we're going to get the big feet, big feet claw things there and his regular hand claws there. So I'm going to take out a color from the Army Painter Mega Paint set called Skeleton Bone. You can use any sort of shade that you want, but just sort of get like a weird, well, I don't know about weird is the right word. Get sort of an off-white, sort of beige-ish bone, desaturated tan color. That's the sort of thing that we're going for with this. You can use any brush that you want. You don't have to worry about it because you're not doing anything super detailed. You are just going over the claws and talons. So I'm just going to use some random little brush here. Again, it doesn't really matter at all. And just go ahead and knock them out. Alright, a little something like that. That's the kind of thing that you're looking for. You might do a couple of layers just for the sake of, making sure that it's a nice even coat. So I'll just go ahead and knock out a quick little top layer too on top. Just make sure that the, first layer that you did was already dry, but it should dry in, honestly, just a minute or two. It doesn't take very long to dry. Alright, and then we're also just going to get the tips of his claws too. Not very much here, just make sure that you get around at all angles and all sides. Alright, bam, there it is. Simple as that. That's all you need and you're all done with that step, so I'm going to rinse off my brush. Now, next step, I'm going to take out a color called Crystal Blue. It doesn't, and again, if you don't have the Army Painter Mega Paint set, if you don't have the paint set that I use for this channel, not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Just get yourself a nice solid blue color. Make sure that it's not too dark and not too light, but just a nice, even blue kind of color. And what we're going to do is we're just going to paint all of the spines, scales? I don't really know what the word is, but that's okay. And what we'll do too is we'll even just thin down our paint just a little tiny bit. You can just take any sort of brush. I'm just going to use a sort of like slightly thicker, slightly thicker bristles brush. Just dip it into my paint cup just a little bit like that, and then just sort of nudge it into your little paint puddle here until it gets the consistency that you want or that you're comfortable with. And you can do some trial and error, you can do some experimenting with it, just sort of whatever you're comfortable with. And you're just going to thin down your paint just a little bit like that. And then, yeah, you're just going to go over all of these scales. And if you want to, you can go just a little bit beyond the scales as well. Like you can get just a little bit of, his regular skin tone surrounding the scales or spines. But whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to go over everything like this, and then we're just going to move on. Now I'm going to go ahead and get all of the skin in between. He's got sort of like 3 sort of layers of scales, like 1, 2, 3. And I would just say, yeah, you can kind of see it from that angle right there a little bit better. And yeah, I would just say go ahead and paint everything in between all 3 of those different layers of spines. There you go, a little something like that. So now he's got nice blue scales there. That's pretty cool. That's already looking pretty darn neat, if I don't say so myself. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and paint the entirety of his mouth, because the whole thing is that Godzilla has atomic breath, right? So he's just sort of dripping atomic energy from his mouth. So we'll just paint the entirety of his mouth, and we'll kind of do up to his teeth. You can do a little bit beyond that, but we'll address that in just a moment. All right. There we go, just like that. So now his mouth is nice and blue. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to blend those scales just a little bit to make it look like they're glowing, just a little tiny bit. And we're not going to do anything too fancy, but we're going to use a method called dry brushing. Now, if you're used to my videos, if you've seen my work before and you've seen what I do, then I don't need to explain dry brushing to you. But if you're new to the channel or you're new to the hobby, I'll go ahead and explain it. Dry brushing is when you take... Hang on, my cats are being a little bit loud and disruptive. Okay, so dry brushing. Now, if you can get your hands on an actual dry brush, if you go to like any sort of, hobby store, miniature painting store, board games or anything like that, you can probably find one of these. It's called a dry brush, and it's got really, really thick bristles like this. And they're really, really, really thick and really strong. And what you do with dry brushing is you take your little paint puddle just like this. You're gonna work your brush into your paint puddle just a little bit, and you're gonna wipe off most of it. That's why they call it dry brushing, is because while you've got paint on your brush, it's such a small amount to the point that it's almost dry. Another method of doing this is that you can just sort of take your brush like this, put it into your paint puddle, and then just sort of wipe it off with a paper towel. I don't like to do that as much though, because it just seems a little bit wasteful, just seems like a little bit excessive, but that's just me. So what I like to do is I like to just slowly work my bristles into my paint puddle, just like this, wipe off most of it, and I've got paint on my bristles just like that. Again, like I said, you can see that there's paint on there, but it's almost dry. And what you're going to do is you're going to just lightly go over the surrounding areas of the spines of the scales. And what this is going to do is it's going to highlight the sort of high contours of the miniature, the high patterns and all that, while keeping the low points that same sort of color. And in this case, the original color is that sort of dark green, and we want to keep that, but we want to get just a little bit of a glow. And to get that, we're going to do this. And as you can see, it's already coming along pretty nicely. Yeah, and you just sort of brush over it, and you can do this to any extent that you want. Obviously, the more that you do to a particular spot, the more pronounced it's going to be. If you don't want it to be very pronounced at all, you can just go over it very lightly, or you can just ignore it completely. It's up to you. You can sort of do this if you're confident with it, or if you don't want to do it, don't worry about it. But as you can see, that just creates a little bit of a glow surrounding the scales. You can see that on that side compared to that side. And I think that looks pretty cool. So we're just going to do that to all of the surrounding spines. There you go. So now we just got the nice glow surrounding the spines there, and we're going to do the same thing with the mouth, although that's not going to be quite as pronounced. So we'll just kind of go upward around the mouth, sort of, around the gums, just a little bit. This one's not going to be quite as noticeable, but still, you can just kind of do it to any extent that you wish. All right, and now we've got our nice blue color on Godzilla there. So I'm going to rinse off my dry brush completely. Make sure that when you are rinsing off your dry brush, make sure you really get in there, because when you do dry brush, the paint tends to dry into the bristles just a little bit. Also, when you are dry brushing, if you are doing something that is taking a while, like you've got a lot of surface area to paint or, whatever, just make sure that you're timing everything carefully, because if you're using the same step for, a good like 15 to 20 minutes or something like that, then you can kind of damage your paint bristles just a little bit. So just make sure that you rinse off your dry brush pretty carefully here. And next up, we're going to take out some matte white. You just want a basic white color. And then we're pretty much done. I mean, we're going to have, if you want to go a little bit more hardcore, you can do some details around oh wow, my paint nozzle stopped up. Okay, so here's another little tutorial I can go over really quickly. So my paint nozzle is kind of stopped up there. I'm kind of squeezing, nothing is coming out. But all you need to do is just take a little safety pin like this. Make sure that it's dry, make sure that you don't have anything wet on the actual safety pin. And then you can just sort of poke it into your nozzle, just straight down, maybe spin it around just a little bit, and then just bring it back up, and that should clear it up pretty nicely. 9 times out of 10, that usually works. So we'll just kind of do that now. There we go. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Okay, now the very first thing that I'm going to do, and like I said, you can do this if you want, but if you're not super confident doing it just yet, then you can hold off. You don't have to worry about it. It's just up to you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out a detail brush. I'm just going to take out, this is an actual, like detail brush. It's just a very, very fine, very sharp point on the brush. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily a very small brush. Just make sure that the point is very, very sharp. That's what you're really looking for, is we're going to dot the eyes. Luckily, the Godzilla miniatures are pretty large and they're pretty pronounced, so details like this are actually pretty straightforward and they're really, really good for beginners. So if you are interested in trying details, go ahead and start with these Godzilla miniatures because the details are nice and pronounced and they're not super duper tiny. Yeah, there we go. Now he's got a nice white eye right there. We'll do the same thing with the other one. Just like that. Look at that. Now Godzilla has some eyes. How about that? All right, and then the next thing that we're going to do is using that same sort of brush, and this is a lot easier than the eyes, so I'll do it second. Just dot each little tooth there, and that will just sort of, and you don't have to coat, the entirety of every single tooth. Just sort of a little tiny pinpoint, little tiny droplet on each tooth. That's all that you really need to do to pronounce the teeth. The biggest thing is just confidence. Just tell yourself, I can do this, and you'll be just fine. If you're gonna look at this and you're gonna be like, oh, I can't paint anything that small. You know what? I bet you can. I really, really bet you that you can. So I encourage you to go for it. I encourage you to try it. Again, just get a really, really sharp brush, just like this, a really, really sharp point, and just a little bit of paint onto the tip of your brush, just a little tiny, less than a drop. And then just hold it real steady. Keep your hands on the corner of a desk like this so that you can keep your hands nice and steady. Don't hold your hands up into the air like this. Keep your hands steady like this. Make sure to just have support in the form of your fingers. Just sort of, look for ways to brace yourself, to hold yourself steady. And yeah, you're just here to have a good time, relax, unwind. There we go. Well, something like that. All right, and now Godzilla's got some nice teeth there. He's ready to munch down on some kaiju. He's ready to fight some monsters and breathe some atomic breath. I think that looks pretty cool. And that's all that you really need. That's all that you need for the mouth there. And that's all that we really need for the detail brush. So I'm going to rinse off that brush. And now we'll actually move back to our dry brush. And we'll do the same thing. So we'll take our little, our puddle of white paint right there, and we'll get some paint on there and we'll wipe off most of it. It is very important, I will say, to make sure that what you're going to be painting over is totally dry. In this case, it's all of the scales. And we're just, because if it's still wet, then you're going to get some weird, blending going on. But you can just take some white paint like this, get it loaded up on your paint, and then just go over all of the spines. Now, I will say that when it comes to dry brushing, make sure you go against any defining lines. So as you can see, these scales right here, these spines on the side, are coming up like spikes like this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, just straight upward, right? Well, you want to go down like across them like this. So with your actual brush strokes, don't go upward, don't go with them like this. You want to go against them like this. Because the whole thing is that you want to get paint onto the high contours of the miniature, and you're going to accomplish that by going against the defined lines like that. Because if you go, with those contours like this, then you're going to get paint in between those little cracks, in between the actual spines there that separate. And then we're just going to go over all of the spines like that. And like I said earlier too, you can do this to any extent that you wish. If you don't want it to be super bright, you don't have to do a super thick layer. You don't have to go over it very much. That's totally fine. But if you want it to be nice and pronounced, then you can go over it with multiple layers. In the case of the big central spines there, I kind of want to go a little bit hardcore with. I want those to be a little bit more pronounced. So I'll go over those just a little bit more compared to the spines on the side. And the other thing that I want to stress too is that this is a really, really simple technique, But there are obviously more advanced techniques that involve wet blending and thinning down your paints even more and doing all of that. And that's great, and honestly, those are the expert painters that you want to go to. But if you're new to the hobby and you want really, really simple techniques to knock out these really easy miniatures, then this is a way to do it. I'm not an expert painter. I'm really more of just sort of an intermediate. But what I try to do, what my goal for this channel is to offer really, really simple techniques to folks who are new to the hobby. Now, I understand that that's not a great way to keep viewers, because obviously, after you get to a certain point, the beginner techniques don't really matter much to you anymore, and that's totally fine. You know what? I try to be just a gateway video presenter here, where I can maybe teach you simple techniques to get you into the hobby, but then there are other more advanced painters out there that you would maybe want to go to if you start to get really into it. But there you go, you can kind of see the difference. That's what that looks like from that side, and that's what it looks like from the other side. So as you can see, going over it with just a layer of white like that, a dry brushing layer of white, really, really adds to the effect and the glowingness and all of that. All right, and there you go. So now you've got those nice glowing spines there. That looks great. All right, and the very last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go over the little claws that we did as well. Because, like I said, we used sort of a darker sort of beige bone color. Well, now we want to highlight those just a little tiny bit, and you can just take some white like this, and then you can just go over the toes the exact same way that you went over the spines. Just like this. Just apply a little bit of a quick dry brush over each little foot. Just make sure to be careful a little bit. As you can see, I got a little bit of paint onto his skin right there, that's right before his actual claws or talons or whatever. Not a huge deal though. You can have little tiny imperfections like that, and it really won't take away from what it looks like on the table when you're actually playing the game. Don't worry about little tiny imperfections. I really promise you, most people won't notice, or they won't care. Or if they do, whatever. That's their business. You're here to have fun, you're here to unwind, and you're here to get some table-ready miniatures. Okay, and yeah, the very last thing that I'm going to do too is I'm just going to go over really quickly the claws on his hands. Again, very, very simply, very quickly. All right, and then I'll just... and this is optional. If you want to do this, you can. But I'm just going to go over the mouth just a little tiny bit, just to pronounce the mouth. Just a little bit. Just get your bristles into the mouth like that. There you go. Just a little bit. Not too much. You don't want it to be super pronounced. There you go. Just a little something like that. Cool. All right. So now I'm going to rinse that off, and we're basically done. Now I'm going to do one more thing with the eyes, which, like I said earlier, if you don't want to do the eyes, if you're not up for it, if you feel like, I don't really want to mess with that, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. But I'm going to add some pupils, and I'll just take out some matte black for that. Doesn't matter. Just a real dark color, black, whatever. All right, and then similarly to how we did the pupils, just take your little tiny detail brush, just got a little bit onto the very tip of your brush. Don't want to do anything too intense, and then just dot each little eye. There you go. So now he's just kind of looking right at you. He is ready to go. Tell you what, while I'm here too, just a little tiny thing. This is just for me. I don't think you really have to do this. But I'm just going to get a little bit of paint into his nostrils there. Just to sort of... Yeah, there we go. Just add a little bit of contrast to his nose and his nostrils. There we go. That kind of brings out his nose just a little bit more too. Cool. All right, and that's it. And that is really it. The very last thing that I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to apply some varnish over the whole miniature, and that will just act as a little bit of a layer of protection. And you can just take any brand, it doesn't really matter. You can just take some matte varnish like this. There are other ways that you can go about doing this, but, just getting some actual varnish, and this isn't very expensive. This is, maybe like $3 a bottle or something like that. And this bottle will last you, I promise you, a while. So, yeah, I'll just take some of that, and we'll just get a little bit onto our surface here, and then we'll just go over the whole miniature, and that will just add a little bit of a layer of protection across the whole miniature. If you want, you can water it down just a little bit, so I'm going to take a really, really big, thick brush like this, and then I'll just get a little bit of water onto it, just like that, just a little tiny bit, and then just mix that water in there, and that'll just thin it down really substantially. And then you're just going to go over the entirety of the miniature using this varnish. And that way, just if you do keep it in the box, this will just make it so that the paint doesn't rub off as easily, and like I said, it'll just add a little bit of an extra layer of protection. Now, as you're applying this, you may think to yourself like, oh, that's adding a weird sort of like milky residue to it. Don't worry about it. As it dries, it just becomes clear. So it's not gonna affect the coloration that you've already got. So don't worry about it. If you see that weird sort of like off-white color and you're like, oh no, I don't like that, don't worry about it. Like I said, as long as you buy some actual, varnish for miniature painting. And make sure you get matte too. You don't want like gloss or something like that, because then it's going to look extra shiny. I mean, if you want gloss, you can. If you want your, miniatures to be nice and reflective, but yeah, I'm not so worried about that, so I'm just going to get some matte varnish like this. And yeah, again, it's as long as you do it properly, then it will dry clear. And there you go. That is it. And it's going to give it a few minutes to dry, obviously, but after it dries, you are all set and good to go. And that is Godzilla. All right, well, there you go, everybody. That is Godzilla from Godzilla Tokyo Clash. I think that he's a pretty straightforward miniature to paint, especially since, the core color, that, green and brown color is already on there. I think it should be pretty simple to get across. So thank you, everybody, so much for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and throw it a like. If you want to see the rest of the Tokyo Clash board game monsters being painted, you can subscribe to the channel. I'll probably do one a week, or maybe every 2 weeks. For a little, maybe one a week. We'll see. And I think that maybe for the next one we'll do King Ghidorah, although I'm open to suggestions or requests. I'll probably save Mothra for last, just because she is going to be especially, detailed, and she's going to be the biggest one to paint, I would say, the biggest deal, probably requiring the most skill and most patience. So we'll save her for last, but whichever one we'll get to next week, we'll just go from there. So thank you again, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a good night. Bye.